Welcome to another edition of Africa Newsroom. From the challenges of corruption to the urgent need of inclusive growth, governance and economic reform are not just political buzzwords. Ladies and gentlemen, they shape the everyday life of Cameroonians. As we are in a critical electoral season, we are here to give the floor to this moment to those who are urged to carry out solutions. For more insight on these, we have Mrs. Yvonne B. of the SDF. Mrs. Yvonne, welcome on Africa 24.
Thank you. The pleasure is mine.
And on the other hand, we have Mr. Amungwa Tanyi, who is a lawyer, barrister. Welcome on Africa 24.
Thank you for having me on your show.
But before we get to talk on these takes, ladies and gentlemen, we'll listen to an excerpt from Joshua Osi, who is SDF presidential candidate.
Well, Cameroonians are looking forward to develop their country. They want a modern country, and development is not something that happens in space. You can have a rocket going up to space. It doesn't change the livelihoods of Cameroonians. What they want to see is what happens in front of their door. They want better schools for their kids, better hospitals, and cleaner cities, transport system that works, roads that are functioning, etc. And for that to happen, governance needs to be at the base. And so only a federal dispensation can allow that to happen. And what we understand by federalism, because often that's a question people ask, how many states, how many regions, how many... No, federalism means giving power back to the people. It means in a three-tier system like that of Cameroon today, power should be given back at the council level. The councils are those that can touch the population. And so everything, or nearly everything, all the resources should be at the level of the council. And by a principle of subsidiarity, only what the council cannot do should be done by what we call the regions. And by a principle of subsidiarity, only what the regions cannot do will be done at the national level. And this imposes a federal equalization scheme that is enshrined in the law that even the President of the Republic cannot change. And this federal equalization is a formula that calculates according to the size of your council or region, according to the population, according to your social needs, according to your developmental needs, how much money is being attributed to each of these entities from the state budget. That's how federalism works, and that is why federal countries the world over, and even in Africa, are more advanced than those who are trying to nurture a centralized system. And a centralized system only exists because the president wants to control all the powers.
Cameroon operates under a unitary decentralized system as enshrined by the 1996 Constitution in Cameroon, which introduced the concept of decentralization to promote local governance and development in Cameroon. However, few calls for federalism, especially the Anglophone regions. This decentralization process, promised since 1996, remains slow as of 2024. Only about 15% of the national budget is allocated to local government. As mentioned by candidate Joshua Osi, what is your plan to accelerate decentralization or maybe implement this federalism, Madam Yvonne B?
Thank you very much. I am happy with the figures. On 100, 15% is devolved to the regions. The reverse should be the truth. The central government should only keep 15% and the other 85% sent back to the grassroots, because a real development is bottom-top oriented and not the reverse. Somebody in the centralized, over-centralized, as I like putting it, system in Yaoundé cannot know the realities of the other 10 regions. They cannot know the needs, the immediate needs in order of priority of the other regions. If it were a federal system, the mayor, who is at the basis of local governance, he knows who put him there. He was elected. And the people who put him there expect him to deliver the goods. Their development is informed by their choices. Their development is informed by their felt needs, classified in order of importance. It's not rocket science. Other federal systems have succeeded. We had decentralization, simplified decentralization, but till today, Cameroon stands in the middle of nowhere because all the decisions are taken in Yaoundé, and before they trickle down to the grassroots, you can imagine a project. Let's say I take an example of a road project. By the time what was allocated for that leaves the central space, finally to get to the company that is expected to carry out that activity, so much has fallen along the line. I always like saying they give you a 100 for a project, you take 90, and the person executing it finally has 10. What results do we expect? Cameroon can do better if Cameroon adopts the federal system of governance, power given back to the people, and the people, it will be competition between the federal states, because I will not give a number. It may remain the same dispensation that we have today, but every state will want to be that place where people want to live in and where tourism will flourish, because this country is endowed. This country is rich, but badly governed.
So you're definitely advocating for a balance of equation between regions. Mr. Munga, do you agree with what Madam Yvonne just said? She believes that for the country to be prosperous, federalism needs to be implemented.
Of course, yes, there is nobody that would differ with our opinion. If you go down the streets and you take your microphone and you ask even those that are in the metropolis, they will tell you that. Look at the roads in Yaoundé. But you have mayors in Yaoundé. But before I get there, I think the most important thing that the chairman of the SDS said that touched me, issues of form of state. I'm a lawyer. Nobody wants to discuss form of state in Cameroon. It becomes a taboo to a people whose heritage is that of proximity, governance of proximity. And when you talk federation or federalism or a federal structure of government, it is that system that has to do with proximity, nearness to the people. A person that feels, that wears the same shoe with his population, and that person is elected. Do you know that in federal countries with federal structures, you know how the mayors are regarded? The first thing that one wants to do in his life is to become a mayor. That is one of the most prestigious posts that you have to hold. Is not to become a minister. Do you know that in a federal structure, there is competitivity, like he said. People are competing. States are competing. When you go to Nigeria next door, when you look at the budget of Lagos State, it's more than that of Cameroon. For God's sake, how would you compare the governor of Lagos State to a minister of finance even in Cameroon?
Mr. Bonso, you're bringing up something very pertinent. Because Cameroon is actually rich in timber, in oil and minerals, yet over 37% of the population lives below the poverty line. How can we ensure better transparency and accountability in managing these resources to benefit all Cameroonians, Madam Avon?
Yes, 37%. I don't know from where that figure was gotten. I think it's more than 60% of the population. Economists need to go down the streets of Cameroon and study. We have enough natural resources. Where do our problems come? We don't transform. We export like raw material. We need to revalorize what nature endowed us with. Imagine the entire timber that is shipped out of Cameroon were to be transformed into finished products in Cameroon. You will have companies establishing themselves here. And you have jobs for the youth. We are in a context where Cameroon is wrecked by crisis in 3 of its regions. No youth left a decent job and went and enrolled into the non-state armed groups or Boko Haram. If the environment is enabling, companies are flourishing, and there are jobs, nobody will think of that. So that is one of the things the SDF is promising Cameroonians, creating an enabling environment for the youth to be decently employed, have a living. The peace we all seek will be automatic when we go to the federal dispensation, where everybody will find themselves important. I bet you, once that happens, even Cameroonians of the diaspora will start flooding back home. We have a paradise to build. It just needs the political will, the real rules put in place. Because where governance goes the way it has been in Cameroon, with a few very rich and the rest of the country, more than 60%, very poor, Cameroonians, they've ceased from thinking development, because look at the per capita income. There are Cameroonians who live at below 800 francs per day that cannot purchase a plate of food. If you cannot put even a square meal on your table, talk less of 3 square meals as internationally recommended. Where do you think?
To high inflation, which Cameroonians are actually plagued with. So we are wondering, Mr. Bongwa, for the past 42 years that the CPDM has been ruling the country, do you think this party in power have actually made important economic reforms for all Cameroonians?
Well, I am not an advisor of the party in power, but if I would say something, I'm a political. But it's so appalling when we want to talk about this party today, because that is a state party. And you see, she just touched on issues of governance, transparency, management, job creation, enabling environment for investors to come. If you look at the doing business index, you look at transparency, even in the extractive and mining sector, you want to come into these things, I want to get them into play. You will understand that we are running a mishmash that we call a system of governance in Cameroon. Look at the borders between Nigeria and Cameroon. I regret even her own party is not talking about that. Just doing business. That is one of the biggest business country in the whole world. Nigeria is a giant. Cameroon is unable to tap from Nigeria just in doing business. We've attempted to do some business in Nigeria, but you know the rules? I wanted to register a company with NAFDAC, a soap factory.
Registered in Cameroon? Or?
No, registered in Nigeria.
Okay.
But you see the conditions? The Nigerians are imposing on you to come and build a factory in Nigeria. Do you know that there was a moment that I talk with facts, there was a moment that they banned tomatoes from leaving Cameroon to go to Nigeria? This is not, we can never talk about this. It's regrettable that we are endowed with our soil, manpower. Do you know that this country can live without a president? The people are determined, endowed, just in terms of the informal sector. Go to the streets and see what our people are doing. People are doing their call boxes. People are carrying their bananas on their heads. Cameroon is one of, if you've traveled, we have traveled, you would discover that this is one of the most determined people in the whole world when it comes to the informal sector. With or without a president, they could still live their lives. But where is the enabling environment? The taxation policy in this country, custom policies in this country. You import a fairly used car, you pay more than that. You import a car that is not even done by Cameroon. They're not making effort to do their own cars, but you pay more than that. How do you think that your economy is going to grow? How do you think that you're going to have a prosperous country? How would you think? And that is why the bit that is collected, it trickles down to the pockets of civil servants. Taxation officers, customs officers, look at the type of posh property that they have. They name some quarters after them and go and look at what they do. And there is no way that you measure who is a civil servant where you get your money. Unlike my little age, my father used to tell me that late Amadou Ahijo used to go from one door to the other, finding who a civil servant is. I work with them.
Yeah, they're talking of transparency and corruption.
I work with the Ministry of State Property. And guess what? We did an inventory of state property just in Yaoundé. And I should applaud that minister then. And we discovered the type of houses that later Amadou Ahijo tailored for workers. Knowing that if you are a director in a ministry, you need this type of house, it cut according to your size. And it could be a house that will have maybe 6 bulbs. And they are thinking that you should consume only that one. Meaning that was an accountable period in the history of the country.
Mr. Bonga, we'll get back to this very crucial and important matter at stake, which is corruption and transparency. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for sailing through with us for this first part of the program. Stay tuned. We'll be back. Dear viewers, welcome back on the second part of the African Newsroom. We've been talking about economic reforms and governance with Madame Yvonne B. and Nicolas Amongwa to shed light on governance and economic potentials in Cameroon. But before we proceed, I propose you listen to this report by Marie-Raphaël Antolo.
Produced a cumulative GDP of 161 trillion CFA francs between 2019 and 2024. GDP rose from 28.83 trillion CFA francs in 2019 to 31.98 trillion CFA francs in 2024, showing positive growth despite external shocks linked to the COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and global price volatility.
Actuellement, comme vous le savez, le Cameroun est mobilisé dans la réalisation.
As you know, Cameroon is currently engaged in implementing the 2020-2030 National Development Strategy. 7 major sectors have been identified, and within our ministerial department, there are exactly 3 sectors with real potential to accelerate growth, create jobs, and above all, achieve the vision of import substitution through increased local production.
Vision de substitution aux importations par une production locale accrue.
Agriculture, the backbone of the economy, generated nearly 16.08 trillion CFA francs in value added over 6 years. The secondary sector, on the other hand, showed weak growth of 1.7% in 2024 and a 9.7% decline in hydrocarbons. The tertiary sector is non-predominant, accounting for 55% of GDP with a growth rate of 4.2% in 2024.
Le secteur agroalimentaire, c'est soutenir en fait la transformation locale de tous ces
The agri-food sector supports the local production of all these widely consumed products. The second sector in which we are actively involved is textile production. As you may know, Cameroon produces more than 300,000 tons of cotton each year, with nearly the entire northern region home to social economy organizations and cooperatives that grow cotton. We therefore aim to succeed by supporting the establishment of local processing units for this cotton.
De ce coton.
Over the 5-year period, Cameroon's average economic growth was limited to 2.9%, well below the annual 8% target set by the Cameroon 2030 National Development Strategy. This modest performance was accompanied by a slowdown in private investment and a high public debt, which reached 1,572.45 billion CFA francs in 2024.
$161 trillion francs CFA between 2019 and 2024. Madam Yvonne, tell us, how do you appreciate this economic reform? After all, Mr. Bongwa accused you earlier of, starving Cameroonians through your SDF political party of not promoting economic growth in the country.
I think if there is any businessman in Cameroon who promotes consuming what we produce and producing what we consume is Joshua Osinabangi, the SDF candidate. He mentioned Nigeria. I will call on Cameroonians to visit our website, www.oc2025.com. You find the manifesto and go into the doing business part of it. You will be marveled. With all due respect to Nigeria, as a giant market in Africa, we have other African countries. In diplomacy, we should not only mention one person, but Nigeria is already doing a lot of business with Cameroon. You talk of the trillions and forgot the drop from the 8% expectation to 2.9. Jesus, it's not even 1/3. We all know what is happening in Cameroon. The rate of inflation is wild. The debts of this country, I don't know whether in doing all the studies, they checked how much Cameroon is borrowing. Just until last week, conventions were signed for Cameroon to continue taking loans. Loans that shall be paid by, I think, 3 or 4 generations from now. It's not, that does not deter us from keeping up to tell the world and Cameroonians at large that we are not called the continent for nothing. We are endowed. Everything you find in in other African countries, Cameroon has. We have an issue of bad governance. That is why we find ourselves with such a GDP and a realization rate of less than 2.9. He mentioned cotton. If I go from here without, I was in Yagua, where the highest amount of cotton, we went there with my chairman, and we met these cotton farmers. When you produce that much cotton, and it cannot be transformed into finished, the farmers here just toil. And the production industry, out where they export all this cotton, are those feeding fat from the agri. He mentioned also the agricultural sector of Cameroon. What has been improved? Mama, I want to tell you, some regions in Cameroon are suddenly losing their staple. I am an achu eater. Colocasia is nowhere to be found. Cocoyams, banana that we used to use in feeding our pigs. Today, a banana in Cameroon costs 50 francs. They used to consider banana food for the poor. So, talking about my people who eat it in the poorest manner. We used to call it food for the poor, but today, it's food for not only the rich, but the very rich. All what we used to produce in quantities has disappeared. They bring dried rice from the Asian countries, India and all, that is meant out there to feed cattle, and that is what Cameroonians are eating. What happened to UNVDA? What happened to Sembri? What happened to the nice rice from Yagua? Even in the West region here, there used to be rice. What happened? All of those initiatives were killed. We had our butter. We cannot name hundreds of companies that used to transform in Cameroon that were killed. That the SDF is putting back on the table.
We're hoping for a better follow-up of all these natural resources that we have in Cameroon. Thank you for your insights on economic reforms. Let's now shift focus to governance and institutional reform, as the Country Eye Sustainable Group and Equitable Justice report indicates that pre-trial detention rates are still high, with over 60% of inmates awaiting trial in some regions. What reforms will you introduce to ensure fair and swift justice, Mr. Amongwa?
Well, I regret that we talk about the judiciary and we talk about extended pretrial detentions because, Cameroon has ratified a lot of conventions. Even the municipal laws of Cameroon, the domestic laws are there, the procedure, the criminal procedure code. A country where you don't respect your own laws, you ratify even international conventions, you don't respect it. And you are reminded that your prisons are overcrowded. A prison that is intended for 1,500 people, you find 9,000 people. They live under squalid, inhuman, degrading conditions that normal human beings are not supposed to. Even Guantanamo has never been like what we live in Cameroon today. When I get to the prison at times, I'm pissed up. Just the stench that welcomes you into the prison. Go to Kondengi. This is not exaggerating. And you know it works on the enabling environment for business people. It tells you, because the judiciary is the barometer of doing business. If your judiciary is not fair, is not transparent, is not just, in a country where the head of state controls the judiciary, he appoints, he waits for several years. And the National Judicial Council that is supposed to hold and decide on judicial matters is held for years without holding, and nobody accounts for. Magistrates that are supposed to have gone on retirement, they are still turning around. Youths that have come into the profession that would have been practicing and learning are hanging the streets, and at the end of the day, and worst of all, a system where we talked about harmonizing the civil and the common law system. I talk like a common law lawyer. I feel so cheated because the French system is what we call the inquisitorial system. You accuse somebody, it is the person that brings the proofs to you. It is not what obtained under the common law system. And that is why the common law system is very rigid. It's very compelling. It's very just. Before you point a finger at somebody, you must be sure that you have your evidence.
Hard evidence.
Hard evidence. And when you come to it, in a country where you privilege the buying of arms to fight a war against your people, and your prisons are overcrowded by citizens that you arrested them from far, far off regions, and you bring them. I'm coming back to centralization. And you are even doing that against international convention. Even the African Human Rights Court ruled you should not arrest somebody from the Northwest region or from the Southwest and bring the person over to Yaoundé. But they centralize it. You centralize even up to detainees. And once that happens, you just talked about your GDP. How would you manage your GDP? How would it even grow? What you feed, and even, it's just because they think that they're not spending any money, they can arrest people and dump them. If government was actually spending money on keeping these people, government would not be doing this. And it's been heralding a lot of bad image of the country. When you look at the crisis in the Northwest and the Southwest region, that the scars are on Cameroon today, economically. The two regions, they cannot operate economically. They pretend that they are working there. Politicians go in and come out. And today, you hear we are revamping CDC. CDC that used to be the highest employer before the state of Cameroon is being revamped with money that is borrowed. Sonara, the same thing. Money is controlled in Yaoundé, and nothing happens around that area. And you fight that zone with work. Pamol, the same thing. Workers are being killed day in and out. The road that is leading to Pamol, you need to know about that.
Mr. Mungo, I think the solution to all of these is vote. And actually, should ELECAM be restructured to ensure more neutrality and citizens? How do you think this can happen? Because in 2018, voter turnout was around 54%. What reforms will you support to boost other voters' participation and ensure credibility in future elections, Madam Yvonne?
The registration rate, we've never had 8,200,000 Cameroonians registered. That alone is proof that
Cameroonians have overborne, and they think they can change this country through the ballot box. Reason why I'll be calling on all Cameroonians, make sure you go out that day and vote, because staying back is giving the CPDM regime a blank check to cash for you. If you don't go and vote, don't complain. The rates are high. All we need to do now is encourage Cameroonians to know that through the ballot box, we can change this country. 42, going to 43 years of a life is more than maturity. It's more than achieving it all. We cannot maintain octo non-engineerians in the same position when the youth who are supposed to be like their sons and all are not working. The solution is the elections and a reform of the entire system. You just mentioned the judiciary, and he spoke about the crowded prisons. Subject them, enslave them, so that even their families back home do not think. On day 1 in November, after O.C. Joshua swears in, we free all prisoners who have no blood on their hands. We need to thin those prisons. If they knew that arresting and even transferring to this region needed that they give them the amenities, build more space, give them more space, they wouldn't have been doing what they are doing. But you heard a prison supposed to contain, let's say, 2,000 people, has 9,000. I wonder if they stand in those spaces to sleep, or how they live there.
So, Mr. Amongwa, what will you tell Cameroonians and Africans watching you right now? Swiftly, in 3 words, please.
No, telling I'm a Pan-Africanist also, and I think that those that are watching us, they should feel for Cameroon and know that those that desire change, we should join our hands and change our country. The old should give way to the new, because it's overdue. I'm not a politician, but I think that politicians should work harder. I feel bad also that they're selling their chicks, or they're feeding on the data of the market, because they were supposed to get their one candidate, and all of that is still being dragged left and right and giving some advantage to the incumbent. But I think that the people are hungry. If you know what happened in 1990, and if we expect that that should happen this year, I think we can, 92, sorry, you know that we can get a change in our country.
Thank you very much, Mr. Amongwa. Why all Cameroonians and we seated here hoping for change? Great nations are built on strong institutions and bold economic vision. This debate reminds us that Cameroon's potential is vast but untapped. May these conversations spark not only awareness but action, responsibility, and result. I say thank you to Madam Yvonne B., who is a fervent SDF militant, and Mr. Amongwa for being here with us. Ladies and gentlemen, we now draw curtains on this edition of Africa Newsroom. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the rest of the program on Africa 24 English.